Well, hello everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest is Mr. Joe Corallo. Joe, I think you have done work for almost every major publisher from DC, Vault. I was trying to write them all down, man.
Yeah.
TKO, obviously
hmm
Archie, Mad Cave,
Yep.
Vault. You got quite an amazing experience of work. You're Eisner nominated. Like you've done a
hmm
lot, my friend. So
Well, thank you.
congratulations on all of your success. Obviously, today
Thank
we're going to
you.
be talking about Archie, but
hmm
it's not easy to do over anyone's career. So
Yeah.
congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. No, I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's just it's been a wild journey so far, and hopefully it just keeps getting wilder, I guess. So, yeah.
Well, I hope so too. Well, just get
hmm
to know you a little bit more, Joe.
Sure.
Obviously, from a storytelling standpoint, I'd love to
hmm
ask this question from storytellers.
Sure.
If you look back in your life, I would love to know where this passion for storytelling began. And was there maybe a family member or maybe a teacher or someone that kind of drove that passion for storytelling in your life that you could say, you know what, I am who I am today because of this person, or at least they helped me a little bit throughout
hmm
my journey.
Yeah, sure. I mean, growing up, in elementary school through middle school, I had a friend of mine, Brian, and we used to sort of come up with, sort of like fan fiction for things like, Sonic the Hedgehog and Mega Man, things like that. So like it was probably around, like that more than anything. But yeah, and that's how I got into comics was through the Sonic the Hedgehog comics, which I found out existed through Brian
Yeah.
because I was a big fan of the games, and I'm like, oh, they make these comics, so really start picking them up, and that got me into the habit of going to comic shops and going into the back issues and getting a subscription mailed to the house and things like that. So that sort of set that up for me, and then through the years, like in college, I had some friends who also wanted to like work on creative things like writing some stuff, but that was more like sort of TV film kind of like ideas. It was like a few of us, and they were superhero related and things like that. And then it was around like 2010 that I was like, you know what, I really I want to focus on this, myself, and I want to, if I'm gonna, the writing end at least. And I was like, let me, go back to focusing sort of on comics, and that's really, what I'm more or less stuck with.
Yeah. And how did you
Mhm.
kind of break into comics and how difficult was it at the very beginning for you?
Oh, I mean, it's difficult. There's a lot of self-publishing things that ultimately didn't the product itself didn't really necessarily go anywhere specifically, but it still helped me to figure out the craft and sort of what I wanted to do. I got to work with people at first Bob Wolf, who was a big YouTuber in the gaming world, Wolf's Den. That's like, you know, 700 something thousand subs on YouTube. That's ridiculous. But we self-published a couple of comics together. Then I worked with Danny Luckert, who's gone on to collaborate a bunch with like Colin Bunn and is currently doing something with Karina Becco at Boom Studios. So like he's really gotten up to quite a bit, since then. But it was 2015. I got published in my first anthology, a four-page short, and then I had a short, like a one-pager, another anthology, like the next year, and then in 2017 I had co-edited with my friend Molly Jackson an anthology, and that's really when things started to pick up.
Was it called Mine, if I'm not mistaken?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. And I think that was the Eisner nominated, right?
Yeah, that was Eisner nominated for Best Short Story.
Mhm.
And and I had edited that story from Cecil Castellucci and Scott Chandler was the artist on that. And then it also was nominated and won the Ringo in 2018 for
That's
Best
right.
Anthology. Yep.
Yeah. Now you've done a little bit of both,
Hmm.
anthology and then full length stories. Do you have a
Hmm.
preference from a writer's standpoint? Do you kind of like the anthology, the shorter stories that are a little bit more tight and concise, or do you like having a little bit, 24, 28 pages to kind of build out a little bit more of a story, especially if it's going to go on for more than one or two issues? Is there a preference
Yeah.
for you as a writer or creator?
I mean, it all depends. Like I view it all as, hmm, I think the best way for me to explain it is you have to be able to distill your story down to like a single panel.
Mm,
So like if your story was one panel or one image, what would it be? And then it's like, great. Now you have a whole page. Great. Now you have 4 pages. Now you have a whole issue. Now you have 6 issues and figure out how you would do it and pace it. I don't like to subscribe to the idea, and I know there are plenty of people that do of, like I need this much space, or I need this is, the length, and this has to be it to tell the story. Because I feel like that means ultimately you you don't necessarily have a strong hold on your story
mhm.
if it has to be this amount of time, that amount of time. I mean, how many times have you read a book, or watched a movie, or you watch a movie that's 3 hours long and the director's like it had to be 3 hours long, and how many times did you think to yourself, did it though? I don't know. I didn't work on the movie, but I can tell you 20 minutes that you could cut no problem. It's like I don't like getting precious about it in that terms. Just get precious about the story,
Yeah,
and the length and the pacing
yeah.
are different from the story. And I think that sometimes gets conflated. I think people kind of get lost in like, no, the story is all these components, and it's like it's not really. These are that's the conveyance of the story. That's how you're conveying the story, is through X, Y, and Z, but that's not the story. The story is whatever it is. It's a revenge story, it's a love story, it's an action, whatever it is. Like, but the pacing and how you're delivering that story shouldn't be conflated with the story itself.
Yeah,
So,
that makes perfect sense. And then do
mhm.
you have a certain genre that you consider to be your favorite, or do you like to have kind of diversity in genre, just so that you could kind of play around with different types of stories and different worlds and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the latter. I love genre fiction. That's my go-to a lot. But for me, when I'm writing stuff, it's usually what are the characters, what's the situation, and genre is almost like the coat of paint that goes on it. It's oh, it's a story about this guy that lost something, is trying to get it back, or whatever it is, and you can that can have sci-fi paint on it, that can have fantasy paint on it, it could be crime noir, whatever it is, but that the core of it is like, oh, I lost something, I got to get it back, and like you can do that in any genre. So that's usually the way I look at it, is like, who are the characters I find. I like it more when it's, character driven and character focused, and who is this person? How are they evolving over the course of the story? And you can do that in sort of any genre. That's not to dismiss the world building. I love good world building, and it's good to have in the background. It can sometimes, I think, it gets too distracting when it becomes something where the story stops for someone to explain what it is. I always think to things like, Blade Runner, when the guy's telling, Deckard about, got a bunch of skin jobs running around and stuff. They don't stop
Yeah.
to, they didn't do it where you have like an intern standing next to him being like, gee, what's a skin job? Well, that's when, like, it's like you don't stop the story. You just got to keep it going, make it make sense, and trust the audience a little bit. So I love genre fiction
Yeah.
that's character focused, that you trust the audience to some extent. I think you have to.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak on your
Mhm.
behalf, but the
Yeah, sure.
story really directs which way you're going, whether it's a long, short story or it's genre specific, whatever.
Yep.
It's story's always first, and then wherever that lands, it lands, right?
Yeah, the story the characters are in, and having very strong developed characters
Mhm.
kind of tells the story itself. Like if you're like, oh, I have this character and he's living in the past, then this other character, she has this goal that goes against his goal, and this other character, he has his own ulterior motive, but like once you have that all fleshed out, the story kind of tells itself.
Yeah.
Like there's a natural direction it's going in, and I find if you really develop the characters, it's like, oh, okay. So if you're stuck anywhere in a story, it's like, well, no, of course this character is going to react to this when they find this out. So like it really just helps push the story along.
And is that the funnest part for you as a storyteller, is really the development of each of the characters?
Yeah, I mean it's a big part of it. I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about storytelling, especially in comics, is you sort of work out, like hypothetically speaking, whatever, like a 5 or 6 issue miniseries. You have to have that worked out and like the ending in mind before you even start it, and then you start it, so you have this whole plot in your head, or you're working on it. It might be like a year before, or maybe a year and a half before it's all finished and people get to the end of it, and you thinking of this stuff for a while, and you have it all worked out. You can't really see it any other way, and then you might talk to someone who's like, oh, I didn't see that ending coming, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess since you haven't been thinking about this for like a year and a half, like that's always something entertaining to me, is having that moment you're like, oh yeah, no, I guess that is a twist, or I guess that is a spoiler. I'm too close to this to understand if it's a twist or spoiler or not anymore. But yeah, I think developing the characters and figuring out like the different interactions and how this one goes and how that one goes is some of the more exciting stuff in it.
And from your experience, how often are you in the middle of a story? Let's say it's a maybe a 4 issue arc or something like that. How often are you going through that process where you know what the end is going to be? Obviously, you know how it's going to start. In the middle, maybe you're making some changes. How often do you like have an epiphany where you're like, I need to go back and I need to make a major change because I think it might be better if it leads into ending this way? Does that happen often, or do you try to plan it out in such a way that you don't get yourself into that situation where you have to kind of backtrack a little bit?
I tend to plan it out to avoid that sort of thing. So, at worst case scenario might be going back and, adjusting a line here or there, but nothing too crazy at all, because I really, I like to outline it all in advance. Um, even a longer project, for example, like King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, which came out in April through Mad Cave's Maverick imprint. It's 124 pages. Before I started scripting, I wrote, anywhere from like 1 to 3 sentences describing every single page. So that way I'm like, it's all laid out, and I could be like, me and the editor and the licensor, we could all look it over and be like, does anything not make sense, or should we do this or that? And when you write it that way and then look at it, that's when you can sort of start making some determinations on things and be like, you know what, the pacing here, I don't know if that's going to work. We're dragging this a little. This doesn't have to be 2 pages. This could be 1 page. You're like, mm, maybe this action sequence, I have it as 2 pages, but it actually works better if it's three, and then it's the first and second page, and then the finale to the fight is on the page turn. You turn the page, and it's like, you start figuring that stuff out. Then once that's all locked in, then I script it out, and doing it that way, I've never had any sort of issue with like, oh geez, we got to go back and change this or that, because there is also a level of wanting to respect the artist time and things like that. I'm a lot more inclined to be like, all right, well, maybe, maybe I would have done this slightly differently, but you know what? It's drawn, it looks good. I can fix this in lettering if there was a change I wanted to make, or I can, dialogue this out before it's lettered, not, like going back and forth, being, with the letter asking for different changes. But yeah, that's how I do it to, really it saves me work, having to go back and rework, like, because that can be another issue. Um, because I've had that, in some projects too. You go back and forth. If there's too many versions of a script, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for like, oh no, the line artist is the version 3 script, but we're using the version 4, and then the colorist, we said they're using the version 2 script, and we, oh no, it's like you don't want to get into that
Yeah.
and make it messy, and it can be easily if there's a lot of going back and making adjustments in the script phase. So like trying your best to write tightly, to have as little uh changes after the fact as possible, I think sort of helps everyone.
Yeah. I don't think you want to be known as the writer from the artist perspective or a colorist, right? Every time I work with this person, I have like
Yes.
five versions of the same page, right? Can you,
Yeah.
with all of your experience, can you kind of talk about the importance of that collaboration between the inker, the colorist, the letterer, the editor, all of that, and how
Mhm.
important it is that that relationship is working in a certain way so that way the content does come out the way that it was envisioned?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've gotten to edit some series as well. I did Kim and Kim at Black Mask, Lost on Planet Earth at Comixology Originals, and then at Dynamite, I did Cherish, with Katana Collins. I
Oh
did
yeah, yeah. Had her on
She,
before. She's
yeah,
I love her, yeah.
yeah, no, she's great, super easy to work with. Worked on Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, this most recent one, the Fatal Exams. So I got to work closely with Steven DeSouza of Die Hard fame. So that was fun. But but yeah, and I've edited graphic novels too before I edited the Carmen line at Mad Cave with Dennis Hopeless and Peter Kowalski. So as an editor, you everything needs to sort of click. Everyone needs to be on the same page. You want to keep things moving. So no one sort of gets jammed up at any point. So if the letterer can start with the line work without the colors, so that way you're not rushing the colorist and rushing the letterer, that's great. Things like that to keep it going. I always think it's important to give the letterer ample time to work. I know some situations letterers have talked about getting in where, they have, a couple of days or something to do it, which really doesn't work. You're not going to get the best work out of. But, if they have like a full week, it's a lot easier, to do it. You're not rushing in the same way, and there's time to make adjustments. So, if you see a sequence and you're like, oh, geez, you know what? The writer did maybe overload this like page. We need to trim some stuff. And, sometimes it takes like a day or something here back. So, you're dealing with people in different time zones sometimes. So, it can take that time. So, you want to be working with enough time so everyone's happy, so everyone's able to get, you don't want to be the editor who's having to constantly make these like, midnight hour, last minute decisions on, well, we had to cut this dialogue, or we had to do this, or, that without getting sort of the input from the people involved. But yeah, communication is really important. It's
Yeah.
that, and that's why you have enough of a lead time so, someone doesn't have to feel pressured to respond right away. That's great. So, so yeah, it's really communication is just super important. Um, and making sure, you're hitting like deadlines and stuff, especially when, you're the one who said like, oh, well, I can get this done Friday. It's like, okay, if you're telling me you can get it done Friday, get it done Friday. If something comes up, you say it before Friday. So that way, if maybe we need someone to, something like life happens,
Yeah.
but life happens. And also, I totally understand, freelancers, I'm a freelancer too. You want to get that, you know, that check for the full issue,
Yeah.
so you might be a little hesitant to be like, oh, I don't know if I can color those last 5 pages. You're gonna make sure you can color those so that way, you don't lose out on 5 pages worth of work or money coming in. So there's a lot of things like that to take into account. If you can work with enough time in advance, things can sort of work in a way where it's like, okay, well, maybe the colorist needs a little more time on this, but like it doesn't have to get to the printer till next week, and the artist can start on the next issue, and so you end up juggling about 3 books at once, if not more, because you're like getting the covers in for a book that's not coming out for 2 months, or that's not going to the printer for 2 months, and then you've got your script that you're reviewing and talking about with the writer that's not being drawn yet. Then you have the one that's being drawn at the moment, and then you might be doing your pass for the printer. So you might be working on 4 issues of something at the same time. So it's very important to have, all your ducks in a row, communicating with everybody on the same thing and making sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Sometimes you reach out about something, maybe you don't hear back. You have to sort of make those judgment calls on, well, this does have to get to the printer soon, and I don't want to wait too long. And then, like, I'm not going to poke next week, and then they're like, oh no, I missed this. I didn't realize. Like, you have to gauge that. Like, you don't want to be annoying, but you also want to make sure,
Yeah.
like they know when something has to happen. So,
Last question, and then I would love to jump into Archie,
sure,
and
sure.
new title. Do you have a preference of being a creator writer, telling stories, over editor? Is there one that you enjoy more, or is it just to like working on maybe it's like two different sides of the brain that you get to exercise? How does that work for you? Do you have a preference?
Yeah, I mean, it is more like the two sides of the brain sort of thing. So like I tend to be more creative, like in terms of like writing and stuff later in the day, but the editing is more like analytical. It's going over things like that's something, I can put on a pot of coffee, work on that, and go through and be like, okay, this all works, this all works. I think this works, but let me double check this is what they wanted. Let me email the publisher, or let them know where this book's at right now, because they're trying to figure out where they're going to put in the solicitations. Like, is this book could be ready for next month's solicitations, or is it going to have to be pushed back? And needing to be upfront and forward about that stuff, because they might be like, hey, we got to get moving on this thing, but if you're not ready, I have another book that is, and I want to be able to solicit them. Don't screw us out of, 2 books, because you're sitting there not sure if this book's going to be ready or not. So, there's things like that to consider. But yeah, like editing is something that's very feels natural for me to sort of like wake up, get ready, and like dive into. Whereas the creative stuff tends to be easier for me in the evening.
And are you normally working on both? Like usually you're doing some editing work and then you're doing some creator writer work, or
Yeah.
is it usually one at a time in your schedule?
Um, it can be both in one day. I try not to, if I don't have to work on more than two projects a day, that's usually because that's a little easier to manage, like for me, like outside of just, email follow-ups on things, just in terms of like, okay, let me focus on this thing, break for lunch or dinner or something, and like go to the other thing I wanted to do today. So, because you do want to kind of keep things straight. And it's also important for me to make sure, for the most part, I'm reading multiple comics every day, especially when I'm working, because I think it's very important. I think it's good to just keep those sort of things in mind. Sometimes you see a page layout and you're like, okay, now I can see how this page would work,
Hmm.
and things like that. Or sometimes you see page layouts and you're like, all right, no, I don't want to do it this way. I want to, but I see what they're doing. I want to do it a different way. Like it's inspiring, to read it and to keep yourself immersed in it. I think one of the things you hear commonly, especially from, artists, which I think is certainly more understandable,
Yeah.
um, is, the lack of, being able to read as much as you want,
Yeah.
but I think it's so important. I think especially if like you're an editor, but as well as a writer and anyone doing comics, it's like you have to read them, and you have to involve yourself in other things too. I mean, in terms of being creative, you gotta not just read comics, but read prose, watch movies, watch shows, listen to albums, go to the theater,
Yeah.
watch a video someone recorded of a theatrical performance. Look at how things are done differently in different mediums. What can you learn? What doesn't work? What's something that you're like, oh, maybe the pacing of this I can take and do this. Like you have to find inspiration from sort of everything, primarily comics because that's what you're working on, but there's really good stories outside of comics. I mean, I think great example is, you look at a lot of the early comics and they're from people from the sci-fi pulp scene.
Yeah.
You look at Paul Levitt's early like Legion of Superheroes stuff. It's very inspired by Isaac Asimov, particularly the Foundation trilogy. There's a lot of elements in there. You know, that stuff's important. Not just reading the comics that are inspiring the thing that you want to do, but encompassing all this other stuff. I mean, you know, be familiar with a lot of the greats in everything.
Yeah.
You should be checking out, if there's, hot new movie or something like that, check it out, see what the buzz is about. Maybe you can get something from it. Maybe there's going to be a roadmap of what not to do,
Yeah.
or topics that you're like, you know what, this is overdone. Here's an example of something like that for me is there was a brief moment for me where it was like, oh, a cell phone in a comic, that's cool and clever, but this is like going back a decade now. And now it feels so overused that like I kind of, if I can avoid having a cell phone in a story for a lot of it, I will if I can. I use it in Beckstar because it's important, because it's a road trip story, and it's about a guy who's trying to reconnect with his younger daughter who is on social media. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
It would be awkward to not have that in some capacity, but even then, it's not like the most important part of the story. It's piece of it. But like, for the DC Pride, story with the Coagula. No one's using a cell phone. The King Arthur book.
Mhm.
No one's using a cell phone. Like personally, I'm like, you know what? You know what's more interesting than a bunch of teenagers on their phone is them in knight's armor fighting other knights. I think that's more interesting,
Yeah, I think
you
so.
know. So, so yeah, but like, there's certainly a place for it. I'm not trying to, say you could never do that. Particularly you see, like, autobiographical comics or slice of life comics and things like that. And like, of course, like, sort of the mundane stuff is important to that, but it's because it's that genre.
Right.
Whereas, I feel like we don't need as much focus on some of this stuff in some other genres.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Yeah. All right, let's jump into this new title. I would love
Yeah.
to understand how, like, I don't know the story behind Kardak. Was
Mhm.
this something that you pitched to Archie, or did Archie come to you and say, we would love to do something with this character? Because it is a character that is somewhat unknown, I think. Like,
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I was not familiar. I've read Archie
Mhm.
comics, but I have
Yeah.
not read that. And I'm a big Mighty Crusaders fan, and I don't have the
Mhm.
1966 issue 4 that he was
Yeah.
in. And so it was new to me. So I like it.
Mhm.
Was really enthralled. I'm like, this is really interesting character. How
Yeah.
did you come about this character?
So initially, the first thing I did with Archie was a 5-page story in Jinx Grim Fairy Tales.
Yes.
And I have an affinity for a lot of like Golden Age characters, things like that. And was trying to figure out like a character to use in this, and they suggested, like, oh, you could use like Kardak the Mystic. So he's not that developed in the story, but he's sort of this background character, and I use elements of Top Notch, his appearance in Top Notch Comics #4, which involve these like fish people and things like that. So I was like, let me incorporate that in it. And then, a couple of years later, they were like, oh, we're trying to do something with, Kardak, you want to write it. Since I'd already, worked on the character. So I sort of jumped on that, more of really fleshing out Kardak as a character. For me, this is based on, having read a bunch of the, top-notch comics he's premiered. He's been in, it's mostly Gold Age stuff, but he has a fiance, Lorna. And I was like, to me, making sure this character stands apart from, Zatara and, a bunch of these other characters, I was like, let's make Lorna really important to the story. They're almost like a team in a way, and add that sort of tension to it of, they're this couple, and like he has to do things and step up in a way for this to work. So that's really part of where I was coming from with that, as well as they've been going through some of these other characters like Jaguar, for example, which came out earlier this year.
Hmm.
So fitting it into that, but the approach I was sort of taking was this this is the kind of story that works as both an Archie superhero story and an Archie horror story.
Yeah.
So I think there's a path here that can make people interested in either very happy, sort of like like an early 90s Vertigo kind of,
Yeah.
style to it. And I mean, I love that era of comics and Vertigo, Doom Patrol. I think Nancy Collins Swamp Thing, despite the fact that there's an omnibus is criminally underrated,
Yeah.
Shade the Changing Man, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So so I think there's elements of that here. And honestly, Butch Mapa is I cannot stress how impressed I am with the pages that I've seen from the book. I think it looks, gorgeous. I think the terrifying parts are terrifying. You know, he also pulled influence for sort of the monster that you'll see in this book from those top-notch comics.
Mm.
So, there's a lot of like love for this era of comics, and which goes back to other things I've worked on, like Sheena, who's a character that existed before Wonder Woman,
Yeah.
and those early, like, I love those Golden Age Sheena stories where she's just showing up and just spearing people and
The
things. It's great.
badass. Yeah.
So there's that element of this here,
Yeah.
sort of too. It's a bit of an origin story in a sense, but it's not a we're not slowing down the story to introduce it. It's woven in a way to keep it interesting. Because for me, I want a story to be clear, people can follow it, but it has to be interesting and engaging. There has to be a lot going on. There has to be good visuals. It has to, there has to be multiple sort of set pieces throughout where there's either action or violence or something that's got to be like really, sort of intriguing. And I think I was able to sprinkle a bunch of moments like that, throughout this, Kardak, one shot. The way Archie's working lately, like you saw this a lot last year,
Mhm.
and this year too, a lot of one shots with Judgment Day
Yeah.
being finally, sort of expanding back out into miniseries, the same with the Cursed Library. So, I think if this goes well, if people are excited about this, and same with like Jaguar, some of these other characters, that we can see sort of an expansion on this, which I would love. I love a lot of what Archie's doing. I love the horror stuff, and I'd like to see more in terms of not just one shots, but miniseries or even ongoings and things that people can really sink their teeth into and help expand out and get more people involved.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fun. Also, there's something about taking a character like a Golden Age character, and then bringing them back to life all these years later.
Mhm.
I think that brings a lot of excitement out too, right? Because, I mean, I would think a lot of readers today, right, had missed that opportunity because they either weren't
Oh yeah.
born yet or they were just, like me, man, like the late 80s, early 90s, that's my time frame because that's when
Sure.
I really got into comic books, right? And
Yeah.
so when you look at those writers, they had a huge impact on me. I'm thinking it could be really fun to be able
Mhm.
to meet some of these characters that had an impact so many years ago and then be
Mhm.
reintroduced to them and then to
Okay.
see this whole universe that's really one of the first universes in comic books
Mhm.
were really developed. And I don't think a lot of people realize that when it comes to Archie.
Yeah, no, for sure that I mean, Archie's done a very good job the past few years or so of showing that they're more than just like, sort of slice of life like comedy books, but yeah, they dip their toes in here and there with some of the Red Circle stuff over the years. But sort of comes and goes. So it would be nice to see this doing well enough to have a more consistent
Yeah.
showing through Archie books, whether it's a few books, sort of a year, or a few one shots, or maybe one ongoing, or whatever it is. It'd be great to see
Mhm.
them be able to carry them.
Yeah. If I read correctly, I believe this should be in stores in August. Did I read that right?
Yeah, August 14th. So, it's not final order cutoff yet, so people can still talk to their local comic shops about ordering it. It's an Archie book, so stores are aware of Archie, but if if you want it, make sure you ask. If that if every store out there ordered an extra one or two, that adds up. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. What
Yep.
we'll do is we'll put the preview mag, all the information below. That way we make it super simple for someone who wants to get this. All they got to do is take that to their comic book store and they could enter it in and order it right there for you. So we'll try and make it as simple as possible, Joe. That way people can get their hands on it because it does look like it's a lot of fun. The artwork
Thank
and
you.
some of the covers that have been revealed look amazing.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I'll definitely be digging in.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and Butch did I think cover A, and then cover B is Skylar Partridge, and I've loved her work for years. I've known her for a while. I've gotten to meet her at cons before, and I actually met Eli Wright, or Ellie Wright, rather, who she's a Irish colorist. I was out in Dublin in March and got to see her at Dublin Comic Con. So
Cool.
yeah, so that was fun to meet her before I even knew she was going to be coloring this book. So yeah, it just happened to work out that
All
way.
world, right?
Yep.
Now, Joe, as fans get their hands onto this comic book, how do they meet you? Do you have a calendar that you already have put together of different cons that you plan to be at throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean the cons that I'll definitely be at through the rest of the year, barring any unforeseen circumstances, are, I'll be at FlameCon, which is the weekend after Kardak comes out, so it's like the 14th, 15th, so the 17th and 18th
Yeah, yeah.
in August, and then I'll be at Rose City Comic Con the beginning of September.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, no, I went to my first one last year.
Yeah.
I go to Emerald City often. I have some family up there, so but I was like, Rose City I keep hearing about, so I'm back at Rose City again. I'll be at Baltimore Comic Con later in September, and then I'll also be at New York Comic Con. I know those I'll be at for sure. I might stop into Anime NYC, since it's fairly local for me. And there might be one or two others later in the year, but I'm not sure yet. But those ones I'll be at.
Awesome. And then how do
Yep.
fans follow you just to keep up to date with all the things that you're working on?
Sure. I am on both Twitter and Blue Sky at Joe Corallo, so it's JoeCorallo, and on Instagram at Corallo Joe. I don't post a ton, but I do post about work coming up and things like that. So.
No, that's great, Joe. That's awesome, man.
Mhm.
Anything else that's coming up that you are allowed to talk about yet? That maybe you wanted to kind of spotlight, or is this really where we need to focus for now?
For now, focusing on this is important. I am working on stuff, so I'd be happy to come back at a later date and
Yeah.
talk about some of that when I can. But I mean, the focus for me right now is Kardak. It's King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, which is available now. I would love for the sales of that to go up, because if it sells well enough, there could be a sequel, which would be
Oh,
nice.
that's
Same
through
thing
Matt.
with Kardak. Yeah, that's Mad Cave through their Maverick imprint. So,
Yeah.
same thing with that. And then the other thing too is the DC Pride, a celebration of Rachel Pollack.
Yeah. Which
That
just
was
plates, right?
yeah, that was came out a few weeks ago, but it's if your store still has it, pick it up. If they don't, might as well try to get it to sell out at the distributor level. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not only is my 10-page story in there that got to do with Rye Hickman and John Workman, and it meant a lot for me to work with John Workman. Rye, I've also worked with before, and this was, perfect, but, to also have the letterer from Rachel's run be the letterer on this, that he made the time for that.
Yeah.
And for people who never read that Brother Power the Geek story that Rachel wrote with Mike Allred on the art, it's incredible. I love that story. And I believe it's Allred's first DC work
Okay. I
is
know
that,
that.
because it's from 93. So I want to say, that was his first published work at DC. And if this anthology sells well enough, there's other works of Rachel's that I'd love to see put back in print. If it looks like there's a demand for Rachel's, work, maybe we can finally get a trade or an oversized hardcover of her New Gods run, something like that. So, but these sort of things happen when the publisher sees that, oh, there is an interest in this, so maybe next year we could get, the New Gods reprinted or something. There's no, you never know, but it makes the case easier if something like this sells out. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
mhm,
Well, I'll make sure I put everything below to make it as simple as possible to find all these different works that you mentioned, Joe. Obviously,
mhm,
how people could follow you on social, and
mhm.
then we'll make sure that we have all of the dates that you know for sure that you're going to be at. So if fans want to
Yep.
come visit you or bring some of the
Mhm.
comics that they have to maybe have you
Yep.
sign, I'll have that on there, and then obviously I'll put the preview information and the August 14th date down for Kardak, so we can make sure that
Mhm.
people can get that ordered right away because there's still time.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Well, Joe, it's been a pleasure meeting you. You're always welcome to come
Mhm.
back, my friend. I really
Great.
appreciate you making the time. Sorry, I had to make
Yeah.
some adjustments. I had a back surgery.
Oh, you're
It
fine.
did not. It's not as fun as I thought it was going to be. But doing well now, and I'm really
Mhm.
happy to have you on. And of course, you're always
Good.
welcome.
Good. Thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great
Mhm.
rest of the week, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.